Sri Chaitanya Kripa Bharo Bhuvi Bhuva Bharavahantarakam Vande Rupa.
Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ajunulambito Bujo Kanakabhatatu Sankirtanaya Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksho Vishwambaro Dvijabaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunabhataro Vande Shri Krishna Chaitanya Nityananda Sahodito Gurudai Pushpavanto Chitra Sangdo Tamuno Vandeham Shri Ramakrishna Abhayo Charano Sako Sukado Paramanando Sundaro Subalakyo He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye.
Shri Gaudiya Vaishnava Guru Parampara Ki Jai, Srila Jiva Goswami Ki Jai, Sat Sandarbha Ki Jai, Ananta Kota Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Glorious devotees, thank you for joining today for another discussion on Sri Jiva Goswami's Sri Krishna Sandarbha. We are continuing today with the section of the Krishna Sandarbha dealing with fortification of the Paribhāṣā Sutra, Kṛṣṇastu Bhagavan Swayam. Jiva Goswami has likened this section of his Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha, to a fourfold army in support of the rulership of the Paribhāṣā Sutra within the Bhāgavata Purana. And we will continue today. Again, our main focus in the entirety of Krishna Sandarbha is this one verse from the first canto, third chapter. Iti chamsa kalapumsa Kṛṣṇastu Bhagavan Swayam Indrari Vyakulam Lokam Mridayanti Yuge Yuge. All these are either portions, amsas, or minute portions, kalas, of the Purusha, but Krishna alone is Bhagavan himself. All of them appear on planets whenever there is a disturbance created by the atheists. The Lord incarnates to protect the theists. We've covered the first division, supportive statements, wherein Srila Jiva Goswami pointed two particular verses in the Bhagavata Purana that directly support the Paribhāṣā Sutra, Kṛṣṇastu Bhagavan Swayam. Then he proceeded in the second division of this army analogy to statements in the Bhagavata Purana, wherein, not statements, but the Leela narrative, the various dialogues in the Bhagavata Purana that also point to the fact that, and verify the fact and fortify the fact that Krishna is the main subject of the Bhagavata Purana, and he is indeed the Krishna referred to in the Paribhāṣā Sutra, the primary manifestation of the Supreme Lord. So we'll, in today's discussion, finish up a few Anucchedas in the second division regarding major dialogues. And then we will proceed to the Hermeneutics section. So Anuccheda 71 reads as follows. Out of intense eagerness, Ṣunaka expressed yet again his desire to hear the exploits of Sri Krishna, making known that his heart was not at all satiated in this respect. Then Jiva Goswami offers the following verse from the first canto, first chapter. We, however, are not at all satiated in regard to the heroic deeds of Bhagavan, who is praised in beautiful verses, hearing of which deeds the connoisseurs of aesthetic relish, rasa, experience greater and greater delight, and at each and every word or moment. So Ṣunaka here is pointing out to the speaker that we can hear as much as you can speak. We will never tire in hearing this subject matter of Krishna Katha. So Sutta Goswami at the beginning of the Bhāgavata is speaker. He's relating to the sages of Naimisaranya who are being representative. Their spokesperson is Ṣunaka. So he's presenting questions on the behalf of the sages of Naimisaranya, and Sutta Goswami is responding to those questions. This continues throughout the first canto, whereon the baton is passed to Sukadeva Goswami in the narration of the Bhāgavata Purana. And from then on until the end of the book, the primary dialogue, and there are many dialogues within the primary dialogue, but the primary dialogue is between Sutta Goswami, Sukadeva Goswami, and Maharaj Parikshit, who is on the verge of death. So, and then within that dialogue between Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit, so many other dialogues are brought out to emphasize certain philosophical points. So it's kind of like a nestled presentation, presentations within presentations within presentations, but all put forth wonderfully through the narration of Sukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. The 71st Anuccheda continues. Jiva Goswami writes in regards to this verse spoken by Ṣunaka. We were satiated in regard to topics such as yoga and sacrifice, but not at all by hearing even a full measure of Bhagavan's heroic deeds. In particular, however, we are especially unsated by hearing the heroic deeds of Sri Krishna, who is praised in beautiful verses, Uttama Shloka, such as, and then he's bringing forth the following verse from the 10th canto, the heart of the Bhagavatam, sometimes referred to as the smiling face of the Supreme Lord. In other words, we never consider any amount of such discussion to be enough. The reason for this is that on hearing such deeds, connoisseurs of rasa experience greater and greater delight at each and every word. Alternatively, the sense can be rendered as follows. Others, however, may of course be sated, but not us. This is the syntactical significance of the word however, too. So Jiva Goswami is giving us a little bit more insight into the verse that he's using as the primary pramāṇa or evidence in this particular Anuccheda. So just to remind ourselves, every Anuccheda, for the most part, is centered around a specific statement from the Bhāgavata Purana, and Jiva Goswami uses that statement like a sutra. So the statements of the Bhāgavata Purana that are highlighted in Jiva Goswami's Sandarbhas are like sutras. In the Vedanta Sutra, we have so many various sutras. And then if we look to the Vedanta Sutra as a indicator of the methodology that Srila Jiva Goswami is incorporating, what we find there is there's the Vedanta Sutra, but the real significance of those sutras within the Vedanta Sutra, or Brahma Sutra as it's sometimes referred to, both those names, are there for the Vedanta Sutra, which is drawn from the entirety of the Vedas. This group of sutras has been milked, and it's truly the essence of the spiritual content of the Veda, and the real, the central focus that should be taken for those aspiring to spiritual liberation generally, moksha, but of course, in the case of the Gaudiya lineage, that such liberation or moksha, even if it entails going to Vaikuntha and the different mystic or spiritual opulences there, living on the same planet of the Supreme Lord, Salokya, Samipya being in his presence, Sarsti, having his opulence or sharing in his opulence there. Sarupya, having a form similar to the Supreme Lord of Vaikuntha. And there is this other liberation, which as Gaudiyas we're reluctant even to bring up, but this other liberation of merging into the form of the Supreme Lord. Interestingly enough, my spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, he was so reluctant in dealing with this Sayuja that he hardly considered it a liberation at all, as most Gaudiyas do not consider it a liberation. It's a hellish existence in comparison to the enjoyments to be had in eternal service to the Supreme Lord. So therefore, even in his translation of certain verses that pointed directly to that state of Swarupya, or merging into the form of the Lord, he would say that this was a temporary thing. So there's some deep insight to be had there as far as the objective of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and much more could be said in this regard. So Jiva's brought out this point in regards to Sunaka's statement. There's a little of the commentary here, which we will share with you. In love, there is no boredom. Boredom occurs when one's mind is not already preoccupied and hankered for something not presently available. In love, there is complete absorption of attention and feeling in the beloved, and the absence of desires of anything else. Anya bilasita sunyam. taken from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Also, so just to highlight what Sunaka is saying, we're never satiated in hearing these pastimes of the Supreme Lord, this great hero of the Bhāgavata. When love is awakened for Bhagavan, the taste, rasa, for hearing and singing about him becomes constant. Nama Gane Sada Ruchi, again from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. A devotee established in prema or divine love has immediate knowledge and experience of rasa, the aesthetic relish of transcendental ecstasy in relation to Bhagavan, and thus will never become bored with hearing about Krishna. There is no subject other than Krishna Katha that can bestow such a limitless, overflowing abundance of rasa. Being well aware of this, Sunaka, whose aesthetic sense is highly refined, declares that he is not at all satiated by hearing the heroic deeds of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, which yield greater and greater delight at each and every word, pada. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asserted the same about kirtan. At every step, it bestows the complete taste of transcendence. Pratipadam punamritas vadanam. And we find that this relish, this rasa from hearing Krishna Katha, even extends down to the neophyte Vaishnav. The newcomer is also enthralled by Krishna Katha. And even though he is just starting, he finds in every discourse that he participates in a greater and greater appreciation for the subject matter. Of course, there are some covenants there regarding the hearing and the speaker of the Bhāgavata Purana, most vividly pointed out by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary on the verse 325-25 of the Bhāgavata Purana. Satam prasanga mamavirya samviddo. That this prasanga, the hearing, if we are able to hear from those prasanga, the superlative sangha, the superlative devotees, the uttama adhikaris, that hearing will pull us. Just the hearing alone will pull us step by step up through the different stages of devotional practice very quickly. So that hearing takes one from Shraddha to Nista to Ruchi, and all the way to Bhav. Hearing from any devotee speaking Krishna Katha is beneficial, though. But if that devotee is not on the superlative platform, such hearing is just considered engagement in Krishna Katha is engagement just in the stage of bhajana kriya or regular devotional practice. So it is beneficial for us to always seek out that superlative association when it's available to us and hear from such an advanced devotee. It will certainly accelerate our spiritual growth in an extraordinary and magnificent way. We continue now to the 72nd Anuccheda. Sunaka urges Sutta to describe Krishna's superhuman acts. Sri Sunaka said, "Indeed, Bhagavan Sri Keshava, concealed in a deceptive human form, performed superhuman acts accompanied by Balaram." Jiva Goswami writes, Swami also comments. So now he's relying on the commentary to this verse of Sridhar Swami. Therefore, Sunaka makes this statement with the intention of urging Sutta to speak of Sri Krishna's exploits. The adjective ati marjani, superhuman, indicates those acts that are beyond human capacity, such as lifting Govardhan Hill, which is to say, acts that are impossible for humans. Jiva Goswami continues in his Anuccheda, but how, having become human, could he perform superhuman deeds? In response, Sunaka uses the term kapata manusa. In a deceptive human form, the word human, manusa, refers specifically to a distinct terrestrial, carbon-based life form, parthiva deha vishesha. Therefore, kapata manusa signifies that it is only by dissimulation, kapata, that he appears to be human. In reality, however, he is the absolute truth in human-like form and hence not a human being in the usual sense. Yet, inasmuch as he has a human-like form and enacts human-like deeds, he possesses humanness, manusattvam, of an uncommon nature. The idea is that one cannot deny his uncommon humanness because it is not in contradiction with the completeness of his divinity. Purna Aishvarya. Sometimes when we go through the Anucchedas as Jiva Goswami is presented in his Sandarbhas, because of the extraordinary good fortune we had in hearing the Bhāgavata spoken in a sangha of devotees who are completely immersed in the philosophy naturally. Such points as Jiva is making seem to be to us of a redundant nature. Well, everybody knows that. We understand Krishna is not a human being, but we have to understand and we have to greatly appreciate the extraordinary service that Srila Jiva Goswami is doing in the presentation of these Sandarbhas. These Sandarbhas are a guidebook to our study of the Bhāgavata, and things that we, due to our good fortune in good sadhu sangha, in good association, things that we sometimes take for granted, we should be careful not to take for granted, but always be extremely appreciative of the good fortune that we've received, so that these philosophical points have already taken root in our understanding and given us a firm foundation to understand the Bhāgavata, and the fact that they're being codified in the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami speaks both to our good fortune and the merciful dispensation of the Sadhu Sangha that we've received. And they also speak to the extreme importance of even these simple, what we might consider the simplest of spiritual points regarding tattva, how significant they are, that Jiva Goswami would take so much time to draw them out and to place them in his Sandarbhas and fully unpack them and explain them to us. So really what Jiva has done in the Sandarbhas is extraordinary for our Gaudiya Sampradaya. And these Sandarbhas stand as a testimony to the strong spiritual foundation and the foundational understandings that truly support us in our practice and nurture us in our spiritual growth. Jiva continues, therefore, in regard to the incident of the theft of the Shaimantaka gem, Sukha said, being enraged and unaware of his prowess, he, Jambavan, considering him to be an ordinary human being, fought with Bhagavan, his own master. In this statement, by indicating that Jambavan's knowledge of Krishna was inaccurate, Sukha denies his phenomenality while yet establishing his trans-phenomenal humanness. So even Jambavan, a devotee of Krishna, devotee of the Supreme Lord, when Krishna entered into human society and enacted his human-like pastimes, even this devotee could not recognize him and took him to be just another ordinary human being. This verse being used by Jiva is simply bringing out the significance of the way Krishna was able to disguise himself within human society. That even someone who was devotionally inclined could not recognize him. Jiva concludes the 72nd Anuccheda as follows. The same principle of interpretation is to be applied in regard to statements such as, O learned one, please narrate the activities of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, who appears like an ordinary human being by the influence of his Maya potency, Maya Manusya, because his humanness is deceptive in nature, Kapata Manusa. He is therefore hidden, Guda, in his own self-nature. However, he remains Bhagavan, even while assuming that very human-like form. So Jiva's really unpacked this for our complete absorption of the spiritual truths contained in the 72nd Anuccheda. A little commentary in this regard. In the principal verse of this Anuccheda, Sunak refers to Krishna as having a deceptive human form. It is, in its technical sense, the word manusa, a man, is used to designate a male of the human species, having an earthen, carbon-based, or terrestrial body. To differentiate Krishna's body from this conventional classification, Sunak qualifies the word manusa with the adjective kapata, deceptive. This means that to external view, Krishna appears like an ordinary human male, but in fact, his body is trans-empirical. The word kapata, as used here, conveys the sense of something hidden or concealed. This implies that, although appearing just like a human being, Krishna is Bhagavan replete with 6 majestic powers in full. For this reason, Ṣūṇaka further qualifies kapata manusa with the word guda, hidden. Krishna remains hidden by his yoga maya. Naham prakasa sarvasya yoga maya samavrita mudo yam ni bijanati lokamam ajam avyayam. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. So this verse from the Bhagavad Gita sums up from Krishna's own mouth exactly how he presents himself in human society, and the fact that those that are bewildered by his external potency are not able to perceive his divine nature, even when he's standing directly in front of them. So this section, if we remember, has 74 Anucchedas. So we'll now proceed to the last 2. And again, these are statements in the narrative of the Bhāgavata in support of the Paribhāṣā Sutra in the 2nd division of this fourfold army. Jiva Goswami proceeds. Now it will be shown that Sri Suta's intention was also to speak exclusively about Krishna. The 2nd chapter opens with a description of Suta's delight on being questioned by the sages headed by Ṣūṇaka. From this point up to the 4th verse, Suta offers reference to the sage Sri Sukha, to Nara and Narayan, to the goddess Saraswati, and to Vyasa. So he begins discourse, Sutta Goswami, by his obeisance to these great personalities. Then, beginning his discourse on the Bhāgavata, Sri Sutta says, O sages, you have questioned me in a highly significant manner, beneficial for the entire world, because through inquiry about Krishna as conducted by you, is itself that by which complete fulfillment of the self comes into being. Now, Jiva Goswami points to the commentary of Sridhar Swami. The opening verse of the 2nd chapter begins with the following report of Sri Vyasa, Sri Sutta honoring the words of the sages. Now, in this verse, how Sutta honors them is being shown. O sages, you have questioned me in a highly significant manner, sadhu yatha, because this inquiry is beneficial for the entire world. This is due to the fact that through inquiry conducted by you, thorough inquiry conducted by you pertains specifically to Sri Krishna. Sutta spoke in this manner because the question raised by the sages about extracting the essence of the meaning of all scriptures also culminates in Krishna. Therefore, in the succeeding verses, in response to Ṣūṇaka's questions, the word Doksaja, Vasudev, Sattvatam, and Krishna, Sattvatam Pati, and Krishna have been used with the express intention of specifying his, Krishna's supremacy. So Jiva's pointing out here that we are going to find in subsequent verses different nomenclatures, but all of those are truly the same personality. Anucchedas, Vasudeva, Ṣaṭ-pramāṇa, Kṛṣṇa, they're all Bhagavan Sri Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. So this is the major subject matter of the entire Bhāgavata Purana. Here, the answer to the sage's first question about ultimate welfare, ekanta shreya, is provided by the compound loka mangalam, beneficial for the entire world. The answer to the second question about the cause of fulfillment of the self is tendered by the phrase yenatma suprasidati, by which complete fulfillment of the self comes into being. So what Jiva is doing here is he's pointing out that even these answers by Sutta Goswami to Sunaka's inquiries, they also are indirectly pointing, they can only be indirectly pointing to Bhagavan Sri Krishna because of what he is, the supreme personality of Godhead. Therefore, he is the ultimate welfare. He is that which is most beneficial for the entire world. And continuing, he is the complete fulfillment of the self. Little commentary. In the first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavat, the sages headed by Sunaka Rishi spoke 18 verses containing 6 questions to Sutta Goswami. The first of these concerns the ultimate welfare of all human beings, and the second, the source of the self's fulfillment, indicated as the essence of the meaning of all scriptures. The final 4 requests were all directly related to Krishna, as we have seen. On this note, the first chapter ends. He first expresses his appreciation for the excellence of Sunaka's questions, Sutta does, remarking straight away that they all relate to Krishna. This means that Sutta acknowledged even the first 2 generic questions as implicitly related to Krishna, because he recognized him as the source both of humanity's ultimate welfare and of the self's utter fulfillment. Indirectly, therefore, he answered the first 2 questions through his opening statement. Sutta knew well that Sunaka's questions pertain specifically to Krishna, and hence the various other epithets of Krishna, such as Anucchedas, Vasudeva, and Ṣaṭ-pramāṇa, used subsequently by him, should all be understood to refer to Krishna alone. Although these names may be applied even to other forms of Bhagavan, here they are being used specifically in reference to Krishna by virtue of the reasoning provided here. This concludes Jiva Goswami's analysis of the intentions of the principal speakers and hearers found within Srimad Bhagavat itself, a topic that was begun in Anucchedas 44. From this consideration, it is clearly evident that Krishna alone is the primary subject of their discussions. Next, Sri Jiva Goswami begins an examination of the subject of the Bhagavat using the 6 hermeneutical indicators, pramāṇas, such as Shruti, direct statement, and Linga, inferential mark. So now we come into the 3rd division of this fourfold army. And the third and fourth division are presented together under the heading of hermeneutics, Ṣaṭ-pramāṇa and Ṣaḍ-liṅga. What these are two applications of hermeneutics that Jiva Goswami will use. So, of course, our first question would be, what is hermeneutics? What does this mean? What is Ṣaṭ-pramāṇa and what is Ṣaḍ-liṅga? So a simple definition of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the theory and methodology of interpretation, especially the interpretation of scriptural texts, wisdom literature, and philosophical texts. Hermeneutics is more than interpretative principles or methods used when immediate comprehension fails, and includes the art of understanding and communication. So it's an interesting definition, and there's much to be said there, because what human hermeneutics is that, of course, within the scriptures, there are so many statements, and many of those statements are not direct proclaimants, like Krishna stu Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. There are many other statements in the scriptures that, in fact, there's far more of them that don't speak directly than the statements that do, because as Krishna himself explains, he likes parokshavad, that the mysteries of the scriptures, and especially those scriptures that speak of him directly, are interwoven, and the mysteries of spiritual life are interwoven through the scriptural texts and the various philosophical presentations in regards to those scriptural texts. So there has to be a way to approach those texts and extract from them the proper philosophical understanding, or what we would refer to as tattva, and the various spiritual understandings that one derives from the scriptural presentation, when combined together, form a siddhanta, or an overall understanding of what is the interrelationship between the Lord and his various energies, and what is the appropriate methodology to be employed in attainment of what are the benedictions contained within the scriptural texts, and what actually does it mean upon those attainments. What do we actually attain? So sambandha, abhideya, and prayojan. So the methodology, sambandha is the overall knowledge, abhideya is the practice, sajja, and the sajja leads to the ultimate attainment, prayojan. So this particular section of the Krishna Sandarbha is a little bit, well, let's not say a little bit, let's just call it like it is. It's extremely technical, because what Jiva Goswami does is he draws from other schools of thought and the principles applied in those schools, and he gives representative statements in the Bhāgavata Purana to show how those principles of hermeneutics or proper interpretation can also be applied to our study of the Bhāgavata Purana, which is also a scriptural text, a spiritual text. They can also be applied there to arrive at the appropriate conclusion or the underlying meaning and the underlying message and lesson provided within the Bhāgavata Purana. So we'll go methodically through these sections and try to bring out as much as we can what Jiva Goswami is saying in his Anucchedas. We are somewhat hampered in that regard, not being personally schooled in the other major philosophical systems that were current in the day of Jiva Goswami, and they're also current today, but learning all the philosophical systems is quite fruitful, actually, in spiritual life. But for the majority of us, a life absorbed in the Bhāgavata Purana and the teachings centered on just this primary pramāṇa is sufficient to consume and nourish our spiritual growth, especially when we have and can fall back on the groundwork of the proper approach to the Bhāgavata Purana as established in the Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami. So he's done the heavy lifting for us, and he's given us these Sandarbhas, and they let us have a clear vision of what is the way to look at the Bhāgavata Purana and what are the primary philosophical conclusions that we as Gaudiyas should derive from the study of this text. So we begin with the 74th Anuccheda, analysis of the subject of the Bhāgavata through the 6 pramāṇas. So as the title suggested, there are 2 sets of hermeneutics that Jiva Goswami's going to share with us. And the hermeneutics is not limited just to these 2. Now, the first one he's going to use is the Ṣaṭ-pramāṇa of the Mimamsa school. Ṣruti-liṅga, Vakya, and so on. So what exactly does that mean? The Ṣaṭ-pramāṇa of the Mimamsa school. What is the Mimamsa? Well, the Mimamsa school is that school of spiritualists who their approach to the sacred literature, the Vedanta Sutras, is centered upon proper execution of action within human society to attain specific material goals. So generally when we say mimamsa, we're referring to material goals, karma mimamsa. So if we want to go to heaven, then there are certain sacrifices we can perform. So the Ṣaṭ-pramāṇa of the Mimamsa school is when we find in scripture directions as to how to execute these specific sacrifices, how exactly are we to utilize and how exactly do we employ those scriptural statements effectively? The pramāṇa, the evidence, the topmost pramāṇa extracted from the scriptural texts, in this instance, the Vedic presentation, so that the sacrifices are performed perfectly and the objective can be obtained. Now, we have evidence of what can happen even if a mantra is not pronounced properly, and the intonation of the various syllables is not properly applied. When we look to the manifestation of the story of Chitraketu and his also going forward to Vritrasura, and this is actually a highlight, as pointed out in the Tattva Sandarbha, of the Bhāgavata Purana, a way that we know this, this specific Purana is that this narrative is there within it, is the, Vritrasura, and how, because a mantra was not pronounced properly, instead of receiving a benediction from the sacrificial procedure, I believe the sage was Twasta, did not receive an enemy of Indra, but Indra became the enemy of the fruit of the sacrifice. So we know how important in the Mimamsa school of sacrificial procedures, how amazing, how very important getting the details right is. Fortunately for us in the school of bhakti, there's a little bit more forgiveness in our execution of devotional service, and even a little service done in the wrong way with the right intent will give one the proper result. So this is the merciful dispensation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement, and the merciful dispensation of the sadhus coming in this line of disciplic succession from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So let's look at this 74th Anuccheda. We can begin a little of it here. Jiva Goswami writes, in this way, it has been established that the unanimous intent of both the chief hearers and speakers of the Bhāgavata is Sri Krishna. Now the same conclusion will be validated by the 6 hermeneutical indicators of textual analysis, pramāṇa, such as shruti, direct statement, linga, inferential mark, or word denotation, and so on. And then Jiva Goswami proceeds to list and explain these one after another, these 6 hermeneutic indicators. First, shruti, direct statement. Out of these direct statements, shruti, defined as an independent declaration, nirapeksha rava, has already been shown in the statement. Krishna, however, is Bhagavan himself. Goes on to explain linga. Linga, inferential mark. The inferential signifier linga, which has the power to support the independent declaration, is to be recognized in verses such as the following. While Brahma looked on, all the cowherd boys immediately appeared in dark complexions like that of a rain cloud and adorned in yellow silken garments. Elsewhere in the Vedas, however, the relevant Shruti is to be conjectured on the strength of its inferential mark, linga, in the form of mantra. Bahir Deva Sadanam Dami. I cut the sacrificial grass, the seat of the Devas. But here in the Bhāgavata, the Shruti is directly present in the form of the declaration. Krishna, however, is Bhagavan himself. And this is what distinguishes the Bhagavata's inferential signifier, linga, from that of the Vedas, namely, Bahir Deva Sadanam Dami. So, something to unpack here. Actually, it's quite elaborate, the unpacking, but let's first look to the simple statement. A Shruti statement is direct, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam, independent declaration. And here we have a simple linga from the Bhagavatam is easy for us to understand, because what else could be inferred from Brahma's vision? Brahma, the Mohan Leela, speaks to the fact that the Supreme Lord manifested himself before Brahma completely with all of his opulences, showing his extraordinary position to Brahma. And that, as Jiva's pointed out here, is we can infer from, it's a linga, we can easily infer from Brahma's experience of all those cowherd boys and calves turning into forms of Vishnu, being worshipped throughout the entirety of the material manifestation, that they had all come forth from Bhagavan Sri Krishna. So there was no question from this incident that the incident itself could have highlighted any other conclusion than Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, Bhagavan Sri Krishna. There's no other conclusion that could be arrived from that. So with that, our time has come to an end for today's discussion. We'll continue in this same Anuccheda in our next discussion, going into a pretty in-depth explanation of a karma mimamsa application of linga, and how from the linga the shruti is derived. In other words, here's a statement regarding the cutting of sacrificial grass, preparing a seat for the devas. Well, what sacrifice are we talking about here? So that's the point of the linga. From linga, you should be able to, through a logical process, which I will go step by step through, just to give us the schooling of how it's done in that school of thought and that approach to the sacred texts, how such a thing as more details regarding the proper execution of the sacrifice can be determined simply by the linga of this simple statement that I cut the sacrificial grass, the seed of the devas. So they work there's a whole process of working back to the entirety of the understanding simply by this inferential mark or linga. I thank you so much for your time and attention. I realize it's a little bit of a deep and could be philosophically perplexing subject, but it's stimulating to see Jiva Goswami's kindness and generosity in pulling us into these extraordinary spiritual revelations and how they're specifically applied by our Gaudiya lineage. Do we have any questions? If not, I will thank you so much. Vanchakalpatubhyascha, Kripasindabevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavijya Namo Namaha. Hare Kṛṣṇa.
Krishna Kirtana Ganana Tanapano Premamritam Manidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priya